You probably heard stories about one-eyed giants or ancient cities lost under the sea. And you might have been told about monsters that pull ships down to the ocean floor. These tales feel old, like they come from a time when the world was a much scarier, more mysterious place. People back then didn't have science books. They didn't have satellites or microscopes. So they made sense of things the best way they knew how. They told stories. But what if many of those wild, impossible myths weren't completely made up? What if they were early attempts to explain real things? Things like massive floods, strange diseases, or even just big animal bones. Imagine finding a skull bigger than your head, with a single hole right in the middle. You'd probably think giant one-eyed creature too. Or picture seeing a huge shadow under the waves, moving fast, and then finding your ship damaged. You'd likely blame a sea monster. Science has peeled back layers of these ancient puzzles. It has shown us that many mythical beasts and unbelievable events have roots in geology, biology, astronomy, and even psychology. It isn't about proving our ancestors were foolish. It is about understanding how they tried to grasp a world full of wonders and terrors without our tools. And sometimes these explanations are just as strange and fascinating as the myths themselves. So, how much of our history is just misunderstood science? And what other myths are we still believing today? At number 17, could a lonely sailor mistake a sea cow for a beautiful woman? And for centuries, sailors swore they saw mermaids. These weren't just drunken tales. Columbus himself reported seeing 3 mermaids off the coast of Hispaniola in 1493. He wrote they were not as beautiful as they are painted, and that he saw their faces, but didn't find them very attractive. He was a seasoned explorer, not some wide-eyed cabin boy. So, what did he see? Most likely he saw manatees or dugongs. These large, slow-moving marine mammals are often called sea cows. They have a thick, gray skin, a round body, and paddle like flippers. From a distance, especially in dim light or choppy water, their general shape can look vaguely human-like. A manatee often holds its upper body out of the water, cradling its young with a flipper, which might look like a woman holding a baby. This is not a stretch for someone who has been at sea for months, often lonely, and certainly predisposed to believe in maritime legends. The lack of beauty, Columbus noted, probably came from seeing the actual, rather homely faces of these creatures up close compared to the idealized images from folklore. Think about it. Early sailors were under immense stress. They were isolated, often malnourished, and exhausted. They traveled through vast, unknown waters. Their ships were creaky, often noisy, with the wind whistling through the rigging and the groan of timbers. These sounds could easily be misinterpreted. Imagine a combination of the low vocalizations of manatees, which can sound like moans or squeaks mixed with the eerie creaks of the ship. It might seem like a song. This idea of sound playing a role in the siren myth, which is related to mermaids, is explored in nautical acoustics. Researchers like those at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution have studied how sound travels and behaves underwater, showing how naturally occurring sounds can be distorted or amplified in ways that might confuse human ears. And the myth of mermaids is ancient. The first stories, like the Syrian goddess Atargatis, who transformed herself into a mermaid, date back to 1000 BCE. Greek mythology featured sirens, often depicted as bird women who lured sailors to their deaths with irresistible songs, though later traditions sometimes merged them with mermaids. The common thread is irresistible allure leading to danger. This could be a warning against the unpredictable nature of the sea, or a psychological manifestation of a sailor's longing for land and companionship projected onto a strange creature in the waves. Professor of folklore, Dr. Elizabeth Tucker, has discussed how marine mammals, particularly manatees and dugongs, fit the description of mermaids better than any other creature. She notes their human-like eyes, the way they nurse their young, and their general silhouette from a distance. And these animals are found in tropical and subtropical coastal waters, precisely where many ancient trade routes and explorations took place. For instance, the Caribbean, where Columbus made his observations, is home to the West Indian manatee. But it isn't just manatees. The sheer mystery of the ocean played a huge part. We still know very little about the deep sea. The ocean covers over 70% of Earth's surface, and less than 10% of it has been explored. That leaves a lot of room for things to be misunderstood. For example, some acoustic phenomena are still not fully understood. There are strange, powerful underwater sounds that have been recorded, like the bloop in 1997, which defied explanation for years until it was attributed to ice quakes. Imagine hearing something like that centuries ago. Without any scientific understanding, it would be easy to believe it was the voice of a colossal sea creature, perhaps a mermaid. So, when we look back at Columbus's less than flattering description, it seems he was a pioneer in debunking the myth, even if he didn't realize it. He saw something real, something that had been woven into the fabric of human storytelling for millennia, and he started to see it for what it was, a creature of the natural world, not a fantastical one. What other creatures are we misidentifying even today in our own explored world? How much of folklore is a direct, if distorted, report of natural wildlife? And what unseen deep sea creatures might be creating legends for future generations? Number 16 are dragons just misunderstood, dinosaur bones, and big lizards. And if you think about dragons, they are everywhere. Almost every culture, from ancient China to medieval Europe, has stories about these huge, often scaly, fire-breathing beasts. They guard treasure, destroy cities, and fight heroes. But how did so many different cultures, completely separated by oceans and continents, come up with such similar creatures? The answer might lie in a combination of ancient fossil discoveries and sightings of real-world large reptiles. Think about someone living thousands of years ago, perhaps walking through a dry riverbed or digging a well, and they stumble upon a massive bone, a femur thicker than their leg, or a skull with huge, sharp teeth. It's unlike anything they've ever seen from an elephant or a bear. It's clearly from an enormous, powerful creature. Without paleontology, without any concept of extinct species, what would they think? They'd likely imagine a giant, terrible beast. This is the core idea explored by Adrienne Mayer in her book, The First Fossil Hunters Paleontology in Greek and Roman Times. She argues that ancient Greeks and Romans, when unearthing large fossilized bones, often interpreted them as the remains of mythical giants and monsters. For instance, the Scythian nomads living in what is now parts of Eastern Europe and Central Asia frequently encountered the fossilized remains of dinosaurs like Protoceratops. These small horned dinosaurs have distinct frills and beaks. Mayer suggests these fossils may have inspired the griffin myth, a creature with a bird's head and a lion's body, often depicted guarding gold. The beak and frill could be interpreted as a bird-like head, and the body as something powerful and cat-like. And in China, the discovery of dinosaur fossils was incredibly common. For centuries, these bones were known as dragon bones longu. They were ground up and used in traditional medicine, believed to have healing properties. Farmers and healers regularly found them. Think of the sheer volume of such discoveries over thousands of years across a vast land. It's no wonder that a creature like the dragon, with its serpentine body, powerful legs, and often spiky or bony features, became central to Chinese mythology. The description of a dragon often matches elements seen in various dinosaur skeletons of the long neck of a sauropod, the powerful limbs of a tyrannosaur, the armor plates of an ankylosaur. But it wasn't just fossils. Real, living large reptiles also fueled the imagination. Crocodiles are found in parts of Asia, Africa, and the Americas. They are fearsome, scaly predators that live in water and on land. Their sudden attacks and powerful jaws are truly terrifying. And in Southeast Asia, there are monitor lizards like the Komodo dragon, which can grow up to 10 feet long and weigh over 150 pounds. They are powerful hunters with venomous bites. Seeing such a creature in the wild would be an awe-inspiring and terrifying experience, easily lending itself to tales of monsters. And large snakes, like pythons and anacondas, can grow to incredible lengths, sometimes over 20 feet. Marco Polo, in his 13th century travels, described huge serpents in China, referring to large snakes that could easily be seen as real-world dragons. These animals are powerful constrictors capable of killing large prey. The idea of a winged dragon, however, might come from a combination of seeing large birds of prey and imagining them combined with serpentine bodies, or from the discovery of pterosaur fossils. The fire-breathing aspect is a bit trickier. Some theories suggest it could come from observing natural phenomena like volcanic vents emitting sulfurous gases that could ignite, or even meteors streaking across the sky. The idea of a creature linked to fire and destruction would certainly fit the power and terror associated with dragons. It might also be a symbolic representation of destructive forces. So, the dragon myth, far from being just a fantasy, seems to be a complex mosaic. And it stitches together the awe-inspiring discoveries of gigantic fossilized bones, the real fear inspired by apex reptilian predators, and perhaps even spectacular natural events. It's a testament to ancient people trying to make sense of a world that was full of things far larger and more dangerous than themselves. What other mythical creatures could be composite images of multiple real animals or phenomena? How many ancient fossil discoveries still lie undiscovered, waiting to rewrite our understanding of mythology? And does the enduring popularity of dragons speak to a primal human fear of apex predators, even when they no longer roam the earth? Or number 15, did actual encounters with small, elusive people inspire tales of little folk? And when you think of Ireland, you probably think of leprechauns. Small, bearded men, dressed in green, hiding pots of gold at the end of rainbows. They are mischievous, solitary, and famously hard to catch. But where did this idea come from? It turns out, like many myths, the leprechaun might have roots in something very real, something less magical, but equally compelling encounters with earlier, perhaps smaller groups of people, or simply the personification of nature. For one thing, the idea of little people is not unique to Ireland. Many cultures around the world have similar folklore, whether they are dwarves, gnomes, or various types of fairies. Often, these stories emerge from a dominant population's encounters with smaller, more reclusive groups living in remote areas or practicing different ways of life. In ancient Ireland, before the arrival of the Celts, there were various indigenous peoples, and it is possible that as Celtic and later Norman invaders spread across the island, they encountered remnants of these earlier populations. These groups might have been smaller in stature or lived in ways that seemed mysterious to the newcomers, perhaps in hidden settlements or using ancient earthworks. Archaeological sites in Ireland, like the numerous fairy forts or ring forts, are a good example. These circular earthen enclosures, dating back to the Iron Age or early medieval period, were once homes or defensive structures. But over time, as their original purpose was forgotten, local folklore began to associate them with the AOC people of the Mounds, the mythical race of Ireland. People believed these forts were entrances to the underworld or homes of the fairies and leprechauns. This is a common phenomenon where ancient structures become woven into local mythology, particularly if their original builders are no longer remembered. But it isn't just about different human groups. The leprechaun particularly is often associated with the natural world in specific crafts. He's a shoemaker, a craftsman. This could be a reflection of skilled artisans, perhaps even solitary hermits or tinkers who lived on the fringes of society. Their skills were valuable, and their reclusive nature might have given them an air of mystery. A solitary figure seen working intently, perhaps in a secluded glen, could easily become the basis for a story about a hidden magical being. And some folklorists suggest that the little people are symbolic representations of the original pre-Celtic nature spirits. As Christianity spread, these older pagan beliefs didn't vanish entirely. Instead, they often transformed, with the old gods and spirits becoming fairies, elves, or leprechauns. They were reduced in power, made smaller, more mischievous, but still tied to the land and its ancient ways. Dr. John Rhys, a prominent Welsh scholar and folklorist in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, dedicated much of his work to the study of Celtic folklore, often linking these mythical beings to pre-Christian beliefs and the spirits of the land. Consider the landscape of Ireland itself, misty, green, full of hidden glens, ancient stones, and isolated areas. It's a place where it's easy to imagine small, hidden beings. The idea of finding gold at the end of a rainbow, a symbol tied to the leprechaun, is another fascinating layer. Rainbows are fleeting, beautiful, and impossible to reach. So the pot of gold is always just out of reach, much like the leprechaun himself. This could symbolize the elusive nature of wealth, or the persistent human desire for unexpected fortune. The specific image of the leprechaun as a solitary male shoemaker only really solidified in the 19th century. Before that, the little people were a more varied group, but the core idea of a small, elusive being with hidden treasures has been a constant. It speaks to a very human fascination with what lies just beyond our sight, what exists in the wild, untamed places, and what secrets the earth holds. Did actual reclusive or distinct groups of people living outside the dominant society truly inspire these tales? How much of our modern understanding of folklore is simply an attempt to rationalize ancient human encounters with the unknown? And are there still hidden people or undiscovered cultures in remote parts of the world that might one day become new myths? And number 14 are corpse-eating monsters, just our fears of famine and scavengers manifest. And the ghoul, that terrifying creature from Middle Eastern folklore, feeding on corpses and haunting cemeteries, it's a monster that embodies our deepest fears, the desecration of the dead, the horror of famine, and the breakdown of human decency. But like so many myths, the ghoul likely has very real, very grim origins rooted in the harsh realities of ancient life. Think about a time before modern sanitation, forensics, or even widespread orderly burials. In periods of war, plague, or famine, bodies would often go unburied or be poorly interred. This created a fertile ground for a creature like the ghoul to enter the popular imagination. Imagine walking through a battlefield after a major conflict, or a town ravaged by the Black Death. Bodies would be everywhere, often left to the elements. And what happens to unburied bodies? They attract scavengers, animals like hyenas, jackals, wild dogs, and even large birds of prey would naturally be drawn to such a feast. In Arabic folklore, the ghoul is often described as a shape-shifting desert demon, capable of taking the form of an animal, especially a hyena, to lure travelers to their doom and then feast on their flesh. Hyenas, with their eerie calls, powerful jaws, and habit of scavenging from burial grounds, are a perfect candidate for inspiring such a creature. Their nocturnal nature and their unsettling, cackling cries would have only added to their monstrous reputation in the desert night. But it isn't just animal scavengers. The most chilling origin for the ghoul might be human desperation. During extreme famines, like the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 in Europe, or countless similar events in other parts of the world, people were driven to unthinkable acts. There are historical accounts, though often suppressed, of cannibalism and the desecration of graves out of sheer starvation. When society collapses under such pressure, the line between human and beast blurs. Survivors witnessing such horrors, or even hearing whispers of them, would have found it easier to attribute these acts to a supernatural demonic entity, a ghoul, rather than confront the horrifying truth about human capacity for depravity under duress. The Black Death, which swept through Europe, Asia, and Africa in the mid-14th century, is another powerful historical context. It killed an estimated 75 to 200 million people, the sheer number of dead overwhelmed burial systems. Mass graves were common, and many bodies were simply left where they lay. The air would have been thick with the stench of death, and the sight of decaying corpses a common reality. In such an environment, the psychological impact would have been immense. The fear of contagion, the terror of death, and the visible decay of the human body could easily coalesce into the ghoul myth, a manifestation of the primal fear of death's ultimate indignity. Folklorists and anthropologists, like those who study the cultural impact of disease and disaster, often point to how myths like the ghoul serve as a way for communities to process trauma and to set moral boundaries. The ghoul acts as a warning. This is what happens if we don't respect the dead, if we allow our humanity to erode, or if we succumb to our most primal hunger. It's a symbolic guardian of the grave, reminding people that even in death there should be dignity. And the ghoul isn't just about eating bodies. It often takes on aspects of the dead, sometimes described as having a corpse-like appearance. This could be a reflection of the actual decomposition process, the sunken eyes, the emaciated form, the pallor. This half-buried body, partially consumed by animals, might indeed resemble a ghoul reaching up from its shallow grave. So the ghoul, in its essence, is a terrifying mirror. It reflects the grim realities of death, the struggle for survival, and the psychological impact of seeing the dead desecrated, either by natural scavengers or by humans pushed to their absolute limits. It's a myth that serves as a chilling reminder of what happens when the fabric of society frays and basic human dignity is lost. How much of our fear of monsters is simply a reflection of our own darkest capabilities and societal anxieties? What other myths serve as psychological coping mechanisms for collective trauma? And in a world with mass graves and ongoing famines, are new ghoul myths still emerging today? And number 13 are ancient underworld myths, just our fears of dark caves and volcanic vents. And almost every culture has a story about an underworld, a place beneath the earth, often dark, sometimes fiery, sometimes a realm of the dead. For the Greeks, it was Hades. For the Romans, it was Orcus or the Dispater. Norse myths had Helheim. These aren't just fantasy creations. Many of these myths might have been inspired by very real, very physical places on Earth, deep caves, volcanic vents, and ancient burial sites. Imagine ancient people exploring the world. They would come across deep, dark caves that seemed to go on forever. Caves are inherently mysterious. They're cold, damp, often silent, and sometimes filled with strange sounds of dripping water or unseen creatures. The deeper you go, the darker it gets, until your torch can't pierce the blackness. This is a natural environment to associate with death, mystery, and the unknown. For example, in Greece, there are numerous caves with mythological connections. The Cave of Trophonius was an oracle where supplicants descended into the earth to consult spirits. Plato's famous allegory of the cave suggests a primal human understanding of the cave as a metaphorical underworld. But some places were even more extreme. Volcanic regions with their bubbling mud pits, sulfurous fumes, and vents spewing hot gases would have seemed like literal portals to hell. The smell of sulfur, often described as brimstone, is strongly associated with demonic realms in many traditions. Take the Plutonian, or Pluto's Gate, at Hierapolis in ancient Phrygia, modern Turkey. This cave emitted toxic gases, primarily carbon dioxide, which collected in the lower parts, killing animals and even humans who ventured too close. Its ancient priests, understanding the dangers, would lead animals to the mouth of the cave, and they would die, seemingly by supernatural power. The priests, knowing how to hold their breath or being taller than the gas layer, would emerge unharmed, reinforcing their divine connection. The Greek geographer Strabo, writing in the 1st century BCE, described this site and its deadly properties. For the ancients, this was undeniably a gateway to the underworld, a place where the god Pluto held sway. And then there are real burial practices. Ancient cultures often buried their dead underground, sometimes in elaborate tombs, catacombs, or necropolises. The sheer scale of some of these sites would have been awe-inspiring and slightly terrifying. Think of the catacombs of Rome, vast underground networks filled with the remains of thousands. Or the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, with its hidden, elaborate tombs for pharaohs. These were places literally dedicated to the dead, built beneath the earth, and would have strongly reinforced the idea of an underworld. The Roman practice of opening a mundus, a pit considered a gateway to the underworld, on certain days of the year, shows a deliberate ritual connection to the earth's depths and the spirits of the dead. Dr. David Loy, a scholar of comparative religion, has discussed how the physical landscape often shapes religious beliefs. He points out that geological features like caves and volcanoes are often seen as sacred or dangerous places, naturally associated with spirits, deities, and the afterlife. This isn't just about ancient times either. Modern exploration of deep-sea hydrothermal vents, spewing superheated, chemical-rich water from the Earth's crust, reveals ecosystems thriving in what we once thought were uninhabitable, hellish conditions. If ancient people had seen these, they would surely have added them to their underworld mythology. So, the underworld isn't just a fantasy, it's a reflection of humanity's early encounters with the mysterious, dangerous, and awe-inspiring aspects of the Earth itself. It's a primal fear of the dark, the deep, and the unknown, projected onto the very real physical features of our planet. The myths gave meaning to these terrifying places, transforming them into realms with their own rules and deities, a way to process the inevitability of death and what might lie beyond. How many of our religious concepts of heaven and hell are still shaped by ancient interpretations of natural phenomena? Do we still have underworlds in our world today, perhaps in the depths of our oceans or the unexplored parts of our planet, waiting to inspire new myths? And what terrifying real-world places might inspire new supernatural beliefs in the future? Number 12 is the Strait of Gibraltar, a geological wonder misunderstood as a heroic feat. And the Pillars of Hercules, those towering rocks marking the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea. For the ancients, they were the edge of the known world, a boundary set by the demigod Hercules himself. A legend says he either split a mountain to create the Strait of Gibraltar or placed the pillars there as a monument to his journey. But science tells a much older, even more dramatic story: plate tectonics and a catastrophic flood event. Geologically, the Strait of Gibraltar is incredibly significant. It's a narrow passage, only about 8 miles wide at its narrowest point, separating the Iberian Peninsula and Europe from North Africa. It's where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Mediterranean Sea, and it's not the result of a single hero's strength, but millions of years of continental drift. The African and Eurasian tectonic plates have been grinding against each other for eons, gradually shaping the landmasses and seabeds. The rock formations on both sides of the strait, particularly the Rock of Gibraltar on the European side, and Monte Hacho or Jebel Musa on the African side, are indeed impressive, rising hundreds of meters from the sea. They look like natural pillars, But the most incredible event related to the strait isn't its formation, but its refilling. Around 5.3 million years ago, during the late Miocene epoch, a geological phenomenon known as the Messinian salinity crisis occurred. For reasons scientists are still debating, the Strait of Gibraltar closed off. This cut the Mediterranean Sea from the Atlantic. Without a constant inflow of water and with high evaporation rates, the Mediterranean slowly dried up, becoming a series of hypersaline lakes and vast salt flats. This lasted for hundreds of thousands of years. Then, about 5.3 million years ago, the strait reopened. What followed was one of the most cataclysmic floods in Earth's history, the Zanclean Flood. It wasn't a slow trickle. Researchers, like those who published studies in Nature in 2009, have used seismic data and ocean drilling to reconstruct the event. They found evidence of massive erosion and deposition consistent with a sudden, colossal inflow. It's estimated that water poured into the Mediterranean basin at a rate of up to 100 million cubic meters per second, potentially filling the entire basin in a matter of months or a few years. Imagine a waterfall hundreds of times larger than any on Earth today, cascading for thousands of feet. The water levels rose by many feet a day. This event, though far predating human existence, left its mark on the geology of the region. The sheer power of that water carving through the opening would have been immense. It's a far grander feat than Hercules splitting a mountain. The ancient Greeks and Romans, when they came upon these impressive natural formations, probably didn't know about plate tectonics or massive geological floods. They simply saw a dramatic geographical boundary. Pindar, a Greek poet in the 5th century BCE, referred to the pillars as the limits of the navigability of the sea. Plato, in his dialogue Timaeus, places Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, firmly establishing them as the edge of the known, navigable world. The mythology of Hercules creating or marking these pillars likely served two purposes. First, it provided a divine or heroic explanation for a prominent natural feature, fitting it into their worldview. Second, it reinforced the idea of a boundary, both geographical and perhaps metaphorical, of human knowledge and exploration. Beyond those pillars lay the vast, unknown Atlantic, full of its own dangers and mysteries. So, while Hercules might not have used his superhuman strength to create the strait, the true story of its formation and the immense flood that refilled the Mediterranean is arguably far more spectacular. It's a testament to the Earth's dynamic power, a power that dwarfs any human or demigod. What other ancient geographical descriptions hint at forgotten, cataclysmic geological events? Did ancient people truly believe the world ended at these pillars, or was it a metaphor for human limitations? And how much of our own known world today is still bounded by our lack of scientific understanding? Number 11. Was El Dorado a mythical city, or a real golden ritual? And the legend of El Dorado, it conjures images of a lost city of gold hidden deep in the Amazon rainforest, brimming with unimaginable wealth. Spanish conquistadors spent centuries searching for it, driven by greed and the promise of endless riches. But El Dorado wasn't a city. It wasn't even a place. It was a man, and a ritual that was very real and very golden. The actual source of the legend lies with the Muisca people, an indigenous civilization that flourished in the highlands of what is now Colombia, particularly around the modern-day city of Bogota. The Muisca were master goldworkers, creating intricate artifacts not just for adornment, but for religious ceremonies. Their primary deity was the sun god, and gold, because of its luster and permanence, was considered sacred, a direct manifestation of the sun on earth. The El Dorado, which means the gilded one, or the golden man in Spanish, refers to the inauguration ceremony of a new zipa, or chieftain of the Muisca. This ritual, described in accounts from the early Spanish conquistadors like Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada in the 16th century, took place at Lake Guatavita, a high-altitude crater lake in the Andes. And the ceremony was spectacular. The new zipa would be completely covered in gold dust. He would then board a raft, accompanied by 4 of his priests, who were adorned with feathers and gold ornaments. They would paddle to the center of the lake. There, the zipa would offer gold and emeralds to the gods by throwing them into the sacred waters, and then he would dive into the lake himself, washing off the gold dust, symbolizing the return of the sacred metal to its divine source. The shores of the lake would be lined with thousands of Muisca people throwing their own gold offerings into the water. This ritual was not just a show of wealth, it was a deeply spiritual act, a cosmic renewal. And when the Spanish arrived, they heard whispers of this gilded man, and the lake where gold was thrown. Their minds, fixated on wealth, transformed a sacred ritual into the tale of a lost city. They misinterpreted the spiritual offerings as a careless discarding of infinite treasure. This misunderstanding fueled centuries of relentless, often brutal, searches for the city of El Dorado. Lake Guatavita itself has been a target for treasure hunters since the 16th century. Attempts to drain the lake, starting in 1545, were made by various individuals and companies. While some gold artifacts have been recovered from the lake, including the famous Musca raft, a gold figurine depicting the ceremony, now in the Gold Museum in Bogota, the vast fortunes imagined by the Spanish were never found. The gold was dispersed, covered by centuries of sediment, or simply never existed in the quantities fantasized. The lake is now protected by the Colombian government. Historians and archaeologists, like those from the Banco de la República's Gold Museum, Museo del Oro in Bogota, have extensively documented the Muisca civilization and their sophisticated gold working. Their work shows that the Muisca were not a primitive tribe, but a complex society with advanced agricultural, social, and religious practices. The gold they used wasn't just decorative, it was imbued with deep symbolic meaning. So El Dorado wasn't a myth in the sense of being entirely fictional. It was a real event, a powerful ceremony, misinterpreted and exaggerated by outsiders driven by a lust for material wealth. The gold was there, but its purpose was sacred, not hoardable, and the lost city was the lost understanding of a vibrant spiritual culture. How many other lost cities are simply misinterpretations of rich, established cultures that existed outside European understanding? What makes us idealize vast, untouched wealth over cultural richness, and what modern cultural practices are we today misinterpreting as something they are not? Number 10 is the Yeti, or Bigfoot, just a bear, or something more. And the Yeti, the abominable snowman of the Himalayas, or Bigfoot Sasquatch roaming the dense forests of North America. These stories speak of large, ape-like creatures, elusive, and rarely seen, leaving behind giant footprints. People have been searching for them for centuries, driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and mythical allure. But could these legendary cryptids be explained by something much simpler, misidentified bears, or perhaps even a lingering shadow of extinct giant apes? For much of the Yeti sightings in the Himalayas, the most common scientific explanation points to bears. Specifically, the Himalayan brown bear Ursus arctos isabellinus, or the Asiatic black bear Ursus thibetanus. These are large, powerful animals that can stand on their hind legs, giving them a human-like silhouette from a distance. Well, their tracks, particularly in snow, can be distorted by melting or by the animal's gait, making them appear larger and more human-like than they actually are. A bear's paw print, when the animal is walking bipedally, can look surprisingly like a giant, broad human foot. Take the work of David Messerschmidt, an anthropologist who studied Sherpa folklore in Nepal. He found that many Sherpa stories about the Yeti described a creature that behaved very much like a bear, including its diet, habitat, and even its aggressiveness. The local terminology for various bear species often overlapped with descriptions attributed to the Yeti, suggesting a strong correlation. And Dr. Brian Sykes, a geneticist from Oxford University, conducted a DNA study in 2014 on various hair samples claimed to be from Yetis. Most of them turned out to be from bears, including the Himalayan brown bear and an ancient polar bear lineage. And the same goes for Bigfoot in North America. The American black bear Ursus americanus and the grizzly bear Ursus arctos horribilis are large, powerful animals that inhabit the dense forests, where Bigfoot sightings are common. A bear walking on its hind legs, especially in poor visibility or at dusk, could easily be mistaken for a large bipedal ape. The infamous Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967, perhaps the most famous piece of Bigfoot evidence, has been analyzed countless times. While some staunch believers insist it's real, many experts, including primatologists and animators, argue the gait and body structure are consistent with a human in a suit or a bear. But what about the idea of a relict hominid? This is where the myth gets a little more intriguing. Some proponents suggest that Bigfoot or Yeti could be a surviving population of an ancient large ape called Gigantopithecus blacki. This enormous ape lived in Southeast Asia up until about 100,000 years ago, standing up to 10 feet tall and weighing over 600 pounds. While Gigantopithecus is thought to have been quadrupedal and not bipedal like Bigfoot, and its known range doesn't perfectly match the Himalayas or North America, the idea of a very large, powerful ape existing into relatively recent times fuels the idea that perhaps some large hominid could still be out there, having migrated or adapted. However, there's no solid fossil evidence of Gigantopithecus in the Americas or the Himalayas. So, while the scientific consensus leans heavily towards misidentification of known animals, especially bears, the enduring mystery of the Yeti and Bigfoot continues. It speaks to a very human fascination with the unknown, with the idea that our maps aren't complete and that wild, untamed nature still holds secrets. People like Peter Byrne, who spent decades searching for Bigfoot, embody this blend of scientific pursuit and romantic quest for the legendary. Is it possible a large hominid species still evades detection in remote wilderness areas? How much of human curiosity about the unknown is driven by a romantic desire for mythical beasts to be real? And what other large, elusive animals are out there, still mostly undiscovered by mainstream science? Number 9, did ancient people see giant birds that are now extinct? And the thunderbird, that colossal bird of Native American folklore, it's said to be so massive that its wing beats create thunder and its eyes flash lightning. It's a powerful spirit, often associated with storms and the bringer of rain, revered and feared across various indigenous cultures in North America. Could such a magnificent creature have actually soared the skies? The answer might lie in the fossil record of truly giant birds that once existed. Think about the sheer scale of some prehistoric flying creatures. While the thunderbird is often depicted as purely mythical, its descriptions bear a striking resemblance to extinct megafauna. Paleontologists have uncovered evidence of birds far larger than any living today. One of the most famous examples is Pterotornis mariami, a massive predatory bird that lived in North America during the late Pleistocene epoch, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. While not as gargantuan as some other flying creatures, Pterotornis had an estimated wingspan of about 12 feet, twice that of a modern California condor. Imagine seeing a bird that large. Its wings beating would certainly create a significant sound, especially if flying overhead. But even more impressive was Argentavis magnificens, which lived in South America about 6 million years ago. This bird had an estimated wingspan of 20 to 23 feet, making it one of the largest flying birds ever. Although it lived much earlier than human presence in the Americas, its existence demonstrates that birds of truly enormous proportions were once a reality. If any species even remotely close to its size survived into human history, it would undoubtedly inspire awe and fear. And it isn't just extinct birds. Even modern birds, when seen under specific conditions, can appear much larger or more mysterious. The California condor, with a wingspan of up to 10 feet, is already an imposing sight. Eagles, particularly bald eagles or golden eagles, are powerful predators. From a distance, in the dramatic skies often associated with storms, their presence alone could be awe-inspiring. A large bird flying through a storm cloud, disappearing and reappearing, could easily be seen as interacting with the weather, even causing it. The sheer power of their flight, the sound of their wings in certain atmospheric conditions, could be amplified and misinterpreted. Anthropologists like Dr. George P. Horscapture, who worked extensively with Native American cultures, emphasized the deep spiritual connection indigenous peoples have with the natural world. For them, animals weren't just creatures, they embodied spirits and forces of nature. So a powerful bird that appears before a storm, or whose presence coincides with changes in weather, would naturally be seen as a controller of those elements. The thunderbird isn't just a big bird, it's a deity, a messenger from the upper world, a representation of thunder, lightning, and rain. The myth of the thunderbird also serves as a pedagogical tool. It teaches about the power of nature, the unpredictability of storms, and the need for respect. The dramatic imagery makes the lessons memorable. For communities whose survival depended on understanding weather patterns, such a figure would be both a warning and a source of reverence. So, while no bird alive today matches the mythical description exactly, the fossil record proves that giant birds capable of inspiring such legends once existed. And the sheer power and presence of even modern, large birds, combined with specific atmospheric conditions and a deep cultural reverence for nature, could certainly make it seem as if these creatures controlled the very weather. Could relict populations of these giant birds have persisted longer than current paleontological records suggest, perhaps into early human history? What other extinct megafauna shaped the myths and spiritual beliefs of ancient peoples? And how much of our perception of the natural world today is influenced by the unseen forces that once roamed the earth? Number 8 was Thor's mighty hammer, a meteorite or a lightning strike. And Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, in Norse mythology, it's not just a weapon, it's a symbol of thunder, lightning, and divine power. It always returns to Thor's hand, strikes with incredible force, and can even summon storms. It's the ultimate tool of a god. But could this legendary artifact have a grounding in real-world phenomena? The answer might be found in two remarkable natural occurrences, fulgurites and meteorites. First, let's consider fulgurites, often called fossilized lightning or petrified lightning. These are natural tubes, often hollow and glass-lined, formed when lightning strikes sand or rock. The intense heat of a lightning bolt, which can reach temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun, up to 30,000 Kelvin or 54,000 degrees Fahrenheit, instantly melts the material it strikes. When the material cools rapidly, it forms a glassy structure. Imagine finding a fulgurite. It's solid, often looks like a gnarled, twisted root made of stone or glass. It's literally the physical imprint of a lightning strike, a raw, tangible piece of a thunderbolt. For ancient people, without any scientific explanation for lightning, finding such an object would be profound. It would be seen as a direct gift from the thunder, God, a piece of his power made manifest on earth. It feels heavy, unique, and clearly created by an immense force, and the fact that lightning seemingly comes from the sky to strike the earth, just as Mjolnir flies through the air, only adds to the connection. But then there are meteorites, especially iron meteorites. These are pieces of extraterrestrial rock and metal that survive their fiery descent through Earth's atmosphere and hit the ground. They are incredibly dense, much heavier than ordinary rocks of the same size. They are often dark, irregular in shape, and sometimes have a fused metallic crust from their journey through the atmosphere. Ancient cultures frequently revered meteorites. They were literally stones from the sky, often associated with gods and celestial powers. Many cultures crafted tools or sacred objects from meteorite iron because it was a unique material. The dagger found in Tutankhamun's tomb, for example, was made from meteorite iron. For the Norse, finding a dense, heavy chunk of iron that had fallen from the sky, perhaps with a smoky trail, would have been an undeniable sign from the heavens. Its weight, its unusual composition, and its celestial origin would make it seem like a truly divine weapon, a hammer forged in the heavens. The legendary properties of Mjolnir, its immense power, its ability to return to Thor's hand could be symbolic. The power might be the destructive force of lightning. Its return could be a metaphorical representation of lightning striking multiple times in the same area during a storm, or perhaps the psychological impact of a powerful event that leaves a lasting impression. Or it could be that the idea of such a weapon was so potent that its properties were exaggerated through storytelling. The fact that iron was a valuable and relatively rare material in the Bronze Age and early Iron Age further elevates the significance of meteorites. A large piece of iron from the sky would be a treasure beyond measure. Professor of Geology Dr. George R. Wetherill has written extensively on the origins and impact of meteorites, highlighting their historical and cultural significance. The study of impact events shows just how profoundly these cosmic visitors can affect our planet and our perception of it. So, Mjolnir, Thor's mighty hammer, might be a composite myth, drawing inspiration from the tangible remnants of lightning strikes and the awe-inspiring discovery of iron-rich meteorites. It's a way for ancient people to explain and revere the immense, destructive, and yet often beautiful forces of nature that they witnessed in the sky. What other ancient tools or weapons might have been inspired by rare geological or cosmic finds? Did ancient people genuinely understand the difference between a lightning strike and a meteorite fall? And how much of our modern understanding of supernatural power is still rooted in these primal earthly wonders? Number 7. Did petrifying springs and primal fear give birth to Medusa? And Medusa the Gorgon with snakes for hair and a gaze that turns people to stone. She's one of the most terrifying figures in Greek mythology, embodying a primal fear. But how did such a specific, gruesome monster come into being? The answer might lie in a combination of unusual geological phenomena and the very real psychological impact of extreme fear. First, let's look at petrifying springs. These are natural springs with extremely high concentrations of certain minerals, typically calcium carbonate. When water from these springs evaporates, the minerals are deposited, coating anything they touch, leaves, moss, wood, even dead animals in a hard stone-like crust. Over time, these objects can become completely encased, appearing to have turned to stone. One of the most famous examples is Mother Shipton's Cave and Petrifying Well in Knaresborough, North Yorkshire, England. For centuries, people have observed objects hung in the well's mineral-rich waters slowly turning to stone. While it's not instant transformation, the process is visible over weeks and months, creating eerie, stone-covered objects that resemble petrified figures. For people without a scientific understanding of mineral deposition, this phenomenon would have seemed undeniably magical, perhaps even cursed. If you found a bird's nest or a branch seemingly turned to stone, it would be easy to imagine a powerful mythical being capable of such a feat. But Medusa's power isn't just about passive petrification, it's about a gaze. This brings us to the psychological aspect. Imagine encountering something so terrifying, so utterly horrifying, that it paralyzes you. In psychology, this is known as the freeze response, a primal survival mechanism. When faced with an overwhelming threat, animals and humans sometimes go into a catatonic state, becoming rigid and immobile. This isn't literal petrification, but it's a profound, involuntary physical reaction to extreme fear. The ancient Greeks might have observed or experienced such a state and attributed it to a magical power emanating from the source of terror. And Medusa herself is a terrifying image, a beautiful woman, cursed, transformed into a monster with snakes writhing from her head. Snakes in many ancient cultures were symbols of both evil and regeneration, death and life. Their presence on Medusa's head amplifies her terrifying nature. The image of the Gorgon, a monstrous female face with wide eyes, fangs, and a protruding tongue, was a common apotropaic symbol in ancient Greece, often used to ward off evil. It was literally a face of fear used to scare away bad luck. The myth of Medusa also touches on themes of male fear of female power, especially disfigured or monstrous female power. Feminist scholars, such as Helene Cixous, have explored how Medusa can be seen as a symbol of the repressed feminine, a figure designed to instill fear and maintain patriarchal order. This deep psychological layer adds another dimension to her enduring power. So, the myth of Medusa seems to be a powerful blend of scientific ignorance and primal fear. The geological reality of petrifying springs provided a visual template for turning to stone, while the psychological reality of being paralyzed by terror gave meaning to a gaze that could kill. And together, they formed a monster that taps into some of our deepest anxieties. How much of human fear is a primal physical response that myths then try to explain through magic? What other geological phenomena could inspire such specific, terrifying mythical monsters? And does the enduring power of Medusa's myth tell us more about our own psychological fears than about ancient monsters? Number 6 were vampires, just misunderstood diseases and the horrors of premature burial. And the vampire, the pale undead creature that rises from the grave to feast on the blood of the living. It's a myth that has terrified and fascinated people for centuries, especially in Eastern European folklore. But before Bram Stoker's Dracula, and long before Hollywood, the vampire myth likely sprang from a very grim combination of real medical conditions, outbreaks of disease, and the terrifying realities of premature burial. Imagine a small village in 18th century rural Eastern Europe. People are dying, perhaps from an unknown illness. When a body is exhumed, maybe because of a suspicion of vampirism, the villagers might find a corpse that, to their unscientific eyes, seems surprisingly fresh. The skin hasn't fully decomposed. There might be blood around the mouth. The nails and hair might appear longer. These observations, horrifying as they are completely explainable by natural post-mortem changes. Here's how decomposition. The rate of decomposition varies greatly depending on factors like temperature, soil type, and cause of death. In cold ground, a body can decompose very slowly, remaining relatively intact for longer than expected. Purge fluid. As internal organs decompose, gases build up, forcing bodily fluids, often reddish-brown, out of the nose and mouth. This can be mistaken for fresh blood. Skin contraction, nails, and hair don't actually grow after death. What happens is that the skin around the nails and hair follicles retracts and dries out, making the nails and hair appear longer. Bloating. The gases of decomposition can cause the body to swell, giving it a plump or healthy appearance, as opposed to the expected skeletal decay. This was often interpreted as the corpse being well fed from blood. Paul Barber, a folklorist and medical historian, extensively detailed these phenomena in his book Vampires, Burial, and Death Folklore and Reality. He argued that most vampire myths could be traced back to misunderstandings of these natural post-mortem changes. But there were also specific medical conditions that contributed to the myth. Porphyria, this is a group of rare genetic blood disorders. Severe forms can cause extreme sensitivity to sunlight, leading to avoidance of daylight, skin lesions and blistering, excessive hair growth. and in some cases receding gums which make the teeth appear longer like fangs. Neurological symptoms can include mental disturbances, anxiety, and aggression. Dr. L. Illis, in a 1964 article in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine, explored the possible links between porphyria and historical vampire werewolf legends, pointing out how the symptoms align with many folkloric descriptions. Pellagra A disease caused by niacin vitamin B3 deficiency, common in populations relying heavily on corn without proper processing. Symptoms include dermatitis skin lesions, especially on sun-exposed areas, making people avoid the sun, diarrhea, and dementia. The dermatitis can look like horrific burns from sunlight. Tuberculosis, also known as consumption, this disease caused emaciation, pallor, and coughing up blood. Whole families could be wiped out by it, leading to the belief that the first to die was preying on the others. A famous case of Mercy Brown in 19th century Rhode Island, where her corpse was exhumed and its heart burned due to vampire fears, is often cited as an example of this. And the terrifying specter of premature burial also played a role. In a time when medical knowledge was limited, instances of people being mistaken for dead and buried alive were not unheard of. When such graves were later opened, a body might be found in a strange position, or with scratch marks on the coffin lid from frantic, last-ditch attempts to escape. This would seem like the undead trying to break free. The fear of this was so prevalent that safety coffins with bells or flags were invented in the 19th century. So, the vampire, far from being a supernatural entity, was a tragic combination of natural decomposition, misunderstood diseases, and the chilling possibility of being buried alive. It was a projection of fear and ignorance onto the grim realities of death and illness in pre-scientific times. How many people were buried alive, leading to such terrifying myths? What other modern medical conditions are still stigmatized or misunderstood, perhaps giving rise to new forms of folklore? And how much of our fear of monsters is simply our inability to understand complex biological processes? Number 5, could werewolves be explained by real diseases and psychological conditions? And the werewolf, the terrifying myth of a human transforming into a ravenous wolf, usually under the full moon. This gruesome tale of shapeshifting, violence, and bloodlust has roots across Europe, particularly during the late Middle Ages and early modern period, leading to actual werewolf trials. But science suggests that the myth isn't about magic, but rather about real diseases and disturbing psychological conditions. One of the strongest scientific explanations for the werewolf myth is rabies. This viral disease, transmitted through the bite of an infected animal like a wolf or dog, causes dramatic behavioral changes. Aggression-rabid animals become extremely aggressive, biting and attacking without provocation. Hydrophobia, a characteristic symptom in humans, is a fear of water, leading to painful spasms when trying to drink or even seeing water. This might manifest as foaming at the mouth. Physical changes. While humans don't grow fur or fangs, the disease can cause spasms, contortions, and an animalistic demeanor. Victims might howl or growl due to throat spasms. Transmission. The disease is transmissible through bites, creating a terrifying contagion of the wolf-like affliction. Imagine a rabid person, driven mad by the disease, exhibiting extreme aggression, biting others, foaming at the mouth, and making animalistic sounds. In a pre-scientific age without understanding viruses, this would look exactly like someone possessed by a wolf spirit or transformed into a wolf. Historical accounts of werewolves often describe behaviors strikingly similar to rabies symptoms. For instance, many alleged werewolves were reported to have attacked and bitten people. Another condition is hypertrichosis, a rare genetic disorder characterized by excessive hair growth over the entire body. It's often called werewolf syndrome. Individuals with severe hypertrichosis can have dense, dark hair covering their face and body. The most famous historical case is Petrus Gonsalves, born in the Canary Islands in the mid-16th century, whose family line famously exhibited this condition. He and several of his children were hairy people who were presented at European courts. While not violent, their appearance would have been astonishing and easily woven into existing folklore about human-animal transformations. A person with hypertrichosis might look like a man-wolf, even if their behavior was completely normal. And then there's porphyria, a group of genetic blood disorders mentioned earlier in connection with vampires. While less directly linked to werewolves, some forms can cause photosensitivity, leading to nocturnal behavior, mental disturbances, extreme anxiety, and aggression. The connection to animals is less direct than rabies, but the idea of a human suffering from a disfiguring disease that makes them shun daylight and behave erratically could contribute to the overall mythos of a cursed, transformed human. Beyond physical diseases, psychological conditions like clinical lycanthropy also contribute. This is a rare psychiatric syndrome in which a person believes they are transforming into, or are, an animal, most commonly a wolf. Sufferers may act out animalistic behaviors, such as howling, crawling, or biting. Such individuals, if encountered in a superstitious society, would undoubtedly be perceived as true werewolves. The werewolf trials that occurred in Europe from the 15th to 17th centuries are chilling historical events. People were accused, tortured, and executed for being werewolves. These trials ran parallel to the witch trials and were often based on witness accounts of strange behavior, animal attacks, or simply local superstitions. Sheer fear of wolves, which were a real and dangerous threat to livestock and people in forested regions of Europe, undoubtedly fueled the belief that some humans could embody these predatory qualities. So, the werewolf myth is not just a scary story, it's a complex tapestry woven from devastating diseases like rabies, rare genetic conditions like hypertrichosis, and the dark corners of human psychology. It's a testament to how ancient societies tried to make sense of inexplicable human afflictions and frightening animal encounters by transforming them into a terrifying yet understandable monster. How much of human affliction has been misinterpreted as supernatural curses or monstrous transformations throughout history? What contemporary psychological conditions might we be misinterpreting or stigmatizing today? And does the enduring myth of the werewolf reflect a primal human fear of the animal within us? Number 4, was Atlantis a real island destroyed by a catastrophic volcanic eruption? And Atlantis, Plato's lost city, a technologically advanced island civilization that sank beneath the waves in a single day and night. It's a myth that has captivated adventurers, scholars, and dreamers for millennia. And countless expeditions have searched for it, from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. But what if the true story of Atlantis is not about a fantastical continent, but a very real, very powerful volcanic eruption that devastated an advanced ancient civilization? This brings us to the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini in the Aegean Sea. Around 1600 BCE, Thera was home to Akrotiri, a thriving Bronze Age city of the Minoan civilization. The Minoans, centered on the island of Crete, were one of Europe's first great civilizations, known for their advanced art, architecture, and extensive maritime trade networks. Akrotiri itself was a sophisticated urban center with multi-story buildings, indoor plumbing, and elaborate frescoes, showing a level of advancement comparable to or even exceeding other cities of its time. Then, disaster struck. The volcano at the heart of Thera erupted with cataclysmic force. It was one of the largest volcanic events in human history, estimated to be a volcanic explosivity index VEI of 6 or 7, comparable to the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa. The eruption blanketed the island in meters of pumice and ash, preserving the city of Akrotiri almost perfectly, like Pompeii, but for a much longer time. An archaeologist Spiridon Marinatos began excavating Akrotiri in 1967, revealing the incredible sophistication of the Minoan city beneath the ash. But the destruction wasn't limited to Thera. The eruption caused massive tsunamis, likely hundreds of feet high, that crashed into the surrounding islands and the coast of Crete, about 70 miles to the south. These waves would have devastated coastal settlements, agricultural lands, and critical Minoan fleets. Furthermore, the immense ash cloud traveled for thousands of miles, causing significant climate disruption and crop failures across the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. And ice core data from Greenland shows a distinct spike in atmospheric sulfate aerosols around 1600 BCE, confirming a major eruption. Plato, in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, describes Atlantis as an island larger than Libya and Asia put together, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. He says it was destroyed in a single dreadful day and night. While Plato's account is much grander in scale and geographical location than Thera, many scholars, notably Marinatos himself, have argued that the Thera eruption provides a plausible real-world basis for the Atlantis myth. Plato lived around 400 to 300 BCE, over 1,000 years after the Thera eruption. He explicitly states that his story of Atlantis came from Egyptian priests to the Athenian statesman Solon, and then down through generations to him. Oral traditions, especially over such long periods, are often embellished, exaggerated, and geographically shifted. The story of a powerful advanced island civilization suddenly wiped out by a natural catastrophe could easily be transformed into the legend of Atlantis. The similarities are striking: a powerful island civilization, a sudden catastrophic destruction, and a connection to a maritime empire. The discrepancies in size and location can be attributed to the natural evolution of a story over a millennium. The Minoans, with their advanced civilization and maritime prowess, fit the description of a powerful ancient empire. Their sudden decline after the Thera eruption aligns with the story of Atlantis' swift end. So, while the literal Atlantis, as Plato described it, remains unfound, the myth itself could be a folk memory of a genuine historical catastrophe, the massive Thera eruption that devastated the Minoan civilization. It's a powerful reminder of how natural disasters can reshape human history and leave an enduring mark on our collective imagination. Was Plato recounting a true historical event, simply exaggerated and relocated? How many other ancient myths are distorted memories of real-world catastrophes? And could there be other Atlantean civilizations that vanished without a trace, waiting to be rediscovered by science? Number 3. Could the biblical flood be a memory of a massive regional deluge? And the Great Flood. Stories of a catastrophic world-covering deluge, often involving a lone survivor and his family in a giant boat, appear in cultures across the globe. The most famous is Noah's Ark from the Bible. For centuries, people have debated whether this was a literal global event. But science suggests that while a global flood on that scale is unlikely, a massive localized flood event could be the kernel of truth behind many of these ancient myths. One of the most compelling theories centers on the Black Sea. In the 1990s, marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman from Columbia University proposed the Black Sea deluge hypothesis. Their research, published in books like Noah's Flood, The New Scientific Discoveries About the Event That Changed History, suggests a dramatic event occurred around 7,600 years ago, about 5,600 BCE. Here's the scenario. At the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, massive glaciers began to melt, causing global sea levels to rise. Before this time, the Black Sea was a much smaller freshwater lake cut off from the Mediterranean Sea. Its surface level was significantly lower than the global ocean. As the Mediterranean Sea rose, it eventually breached a land bridge, what is now the Bosphorus Strait, near modern-day Istanbul. And the breach was catastrophic. It wasn't a gentle overflow. Water from the Mediterranean, which was connected to the rising global ocean, would have poured into the Black Sea basin with immense force. Ryan and Pittman calculated that the flood might have been a torrent 200 times more powerful than Niagara Falls, raising the Black Sea level by up to 6 inches per day. This would have transformed a freshwater lake into a saltwater sea, expanding its coastline dramatically by hundreds of miles inland and submerging vast areas of fertile land and possibly early human settlements. This wasn't a global flood, but for anyone living in the region, it would have felt like the end of their world. The evidence for this deluge is compelling. Sediment core studies of sediment cores from the Black Sea floor reveal distinct layers. Below a certain depth, the sediment contains freshwater species and indicates a much lower sea level. Above that layer, there's a sharp transition to saltwater marine species, indicating a sudden, dramatic change. Ancient shoreline seismic imaging has revealed ancient shorelines, riverbeds, and delta features now submerged hundreds of feet below the current Black Sea surface. These are remnants of a landscape that existed before the flood. Carbon dating, radiocarbon dating of shells and organic material from the freshwater layers places the transition around 5,600 BCE, a date that aligns with many ancient flood narratives, including some interpretations of the biblical timeline. The geological evidence strongly supports a rapid and massive inundation of the Black Sea basin. For early agricultural communities living on the fertile plains around the freshwater lake, this event would have been utterly devastating. Their homes, fields, and entire way of life would have been swallowed by the rapidly rising waters. Survivors would have fled to higher ground, carrying with them stories of a world-ending flood. These stories, passed down through generations, could have spread and influenced similar flood myths in other cultures, especially in Mesopotamia, which was in close proximity. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a much older Mesopotamian text, contains a flood narrative strikingly similar to Noah's story. So while Noah's Ark might not have sailed across a completely submerged Earth, The deep scientific research into the Black Sea deluge hypothesis offers a powerful, tangible event that could have inspired such a pervasive and enduring myth. It shows how a regional catastrophe, especially for people whose world was their immediate surroundings, could be remembered as a universal cataclysm. Could a flood of such immense regional scale have truly reset early human civilization in parts of the world? Are there other megafloods or ancient catastrophes we haven't found evidence for that inspired widespread myths? And how much of our earliest histories are simply folk memories of geology in action? Number two were cyclops inspired by the skulls of dwarf elephants. And the cyclops, that terrifying, one-eyed giant from Homer's Odyssey who traps Odysseus and his men in his cave. This monstrous figure, with a single massive eye socket in the center of its forehead, has haunted our imaginations for millennia. But the origin of this myth is much less monstrous and much more paleontological, the discovery of ancient dwarf elephant skulls on Mediterranean islands. Imagine an ancient Greek settler or explorer on an island like Sicily or Malta, perhaps digging a well or farming his land. And he unearths a massive skull, much larger than any human or even typical animal skull. It's clearly from a powerful creature, but the most striking feature is a large central opening right in the middle where the face should be. Without any knowledge of comparative anatomy or extinct species, it's very easy to mistake that central nasal cavity for a single, enormous eye socket. The actual eye sockets on these skulls are much smaller and located to the sides, often overlooked or misinterpreted as something else. The specific creatures in question are dwarf elephants, Paleoloxodon falconeri. During the Pleistocene epoch, when sea levels were lower, large elephants migrated to Mediterranean islands like Sicily, Malta, Crete, and Cyprus. As sea levels rose, these populations became isolated. Over hundreds of thousands of years, due to limited resources and the absence of large predators, a phenomenon known as insular dwarfism, these elephants evolved to be much smaller than their mainland ancestors, some no larger than a pony. Their skulls, however, retain some of the characteristics of their larger relatives, including the prominent centrally located opening for the trunk. Othenio Abel, an Austrian paleontologist, first proposed this connection in 1914. He argued that the skulls of these dwarf elephants, when encountered by early Greeks, were the likely inspiration for the Cyclops. His work provided a concrete scientific link between mythological creatures and actual fossil discoveries. These bones were not just large, their peculiar structure was key. The large central opening, which is the attachment point for the elephant's trunk, the narial opening, looks eerily like a single huge orbital cavity to an untrained eye. The fact that these fossils were particularly abundant on Sicily, a traditional home of the Cyclops in Greek mythology, further strengthens the argument. Odysseus' encounter with Polyphemus the Cyclops in the Odyssey is set in a land associated with such finds. The sheer size of the skulls would suggest a giant, and the single eye would make it a truly unique and terrifying giant. The ancient Greeks were known to interpret fossil discoveries. Adrian Mayer, in The First Fossil Hunters, details how ancient Greeks and Romans often interpreted massive bones as the remains of heroes, monsters, and giants. So the Cyclops wasn't just a figment of Homer's imagination. It was a reasonable, if mistaken, attempt by ancient people to make sense of bewildering natural discoveries. It's a classic example of how incomplete scientific understanding, combined with cultural storytelling, can give birth to powerful myths. The large, strange skull of an extinct dwarfed elephant became the head of a terrifying, one-eyed giant, forever etched into our collective consciousness. How many other ancient monsters were simply misunderstood bone fragments or peculiar geological formations? What if larger, true Cyclops-like creatures did exist elsewhere on Earth, or even on other planets? And does the human tendency to anthropomorphize nature still lead us to misinterpret scientific evidence today? Number one, are sea monsters like the Kraken just stories of real giant squids? And the Kraken, that legendary sea monster from Norse folklore, capable of dragging entire ships down to the crushing depths. For centuries, it was dismissed as pure fantasy, a terrifying tale told by superstitious sailors. But it turns out the Kraken is very real, and science has proven it's the giant squid, and its even bigger cousin, the colossal squid. The myth of the Kraken dates back to 13th century Norse sagas, describing a creature so massive that it was often mistaken for an island. Sailors reported seeing enormous tentacles capable of crushing hulls and pulling vessels into the abyss. These accounts were chilling, inspiring dread in anyone who ventured into the northern seas. But then, in the 19th century, naturalists began to seriously consider the possibility of giant cephalopods. The French naturalist Pierre Denis de Montfort in 1802 collected accounts of attacks by giant octopuses on ships and illustrated a massive octopus attacking a sailing ship. While his illustrations were exaggerated, he was onto something. The first definitive scientific proof of the giant squid, Architeuthis dux, came from actual specimens. In the 1870s, a series of strandings and sightings in Newfoundland, particularly documented by the Reverend Moses Harvey, brought the creature into scientific focus. Fishermen started catching parts of these animals or finding entire carcasses. Harvey famously exhibited a giant squid specimen in his study, drawing widespread attention. These were no small creatures. Architeuthis dux can reach lengths of up to 43 feet 13 meters for females, including its two longest feeding tentacles. Its eyes are the largest of any known animal, sometimes up to 11 inches 28 cm in diameter. Its suckers can leave telltale scars on sperm whales, their primary predators. And if Architeuthis isn't monstrous enough, there's the colossal squid Messanichiteuthis hamiltoni. First identified from a young specimen in 1925, and only truly understood after an adult was caught in 2007, this behemoth is even larger and more formidable than the giant squid. It can weigh up to 1,500 pounds, 680 kg, and its eyes are even larger than those of Architeuthis. While the colossal squid is shorter in body length, its mantle is much wider and more robust, and its arms and tentacles are equipped with sharp swiveling hooks, not just suckers. Imagine those hooks tearing at a ship's hull. These animals are deep sea dwellers, usually found at depths of 1,000 to 3,000 feet, 300 to 900 meters. Their habitat explains why sightings are so rare and why their existence remained legendary for so long. For centuries, the only evidence of their immense size came from fishermen's tales, whale stomachs, and the occasional washed-up carcass. The first photographic evidence of a live giant squid in its natural habitat wasn't captured until 2004 by a team led by Japanese zoologist Tsunemi Kubodera. This was a monumental achievement, finally showing the creature alive and in its environment, not just as a dead specimen or a blurry image. This confirmed what sailors had whispered for ages: there are truly colossal tentacled creatures lurking in the deep. So, the Kraken, that terrifying beast of legend, is not a myth. It's a real animal, or rather, a family of animals whose immense size, predatory nature, and mysterious deep-sea habitat perfectly align with the fears and wonder of ancient mariners. The fear of these real-life monsters, observed fleetingly from the surface, was enough to spawn a myth that endured for centuries. What other massive, unknown creatures lurk in the ocean's depths, waiting to inspire new myths? How does the immense pressure of the deep sea affect the physiology and behavior of unknown life forms? And what other legends of ancient monsters are simply distorted eyewitness accounts of very real, still living animals?